Hi, I'm Grant Woodhams from Geraldton in Western Australia, and I'd like to share with you a presentation on Indians and English facing off in early America, a book written by Karen Ordahl Kupperman. Got it up the right way there? Yep, that's what it looks like. So we'll see that book a few more times through this presentation. Karen Ordahl Kupperman, born on the 23rd of April 1939 in Devils Lake, North Dakota. Her father was Stafford Newell. He was a colonel in the US Army, and her mother, Grace Ordahl, was, as described, a stay-at-home mother. Karen Kupperman descended from immigrant Scandinavians, both Swedish and Norwegian. Her father was in the US Army, as mentioned, and the family moved several times to locations in Georgia and North Dakota. They also spent some time in Missouri and overseas in Japan. So Ordahl Kupperman, or Karen Kupperman's qualifications: when her family was living in Springfield, Missouri, she attended the University of Missouri, where she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in history. She majored and finished that degree in 1961. A year later, after winning a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, we find her graduating from Harvard University with a master's degree. She then spent some time working as a teacher in several private schools in the greater New York area before she married Joel Kupperman, who was a philosophy professor at the University of Connecticut, where Ordahl, or now Ordahl Kupperman, moved to teach. In the mid-1970s, the Kuppermans travelled to Cambridge in the United Kingdom, where Karen Ordahl Kupperman studied for her PhD, which she completed in 1978. She then returned to the United States and to the University of Connecticut, where she taught until 1995, when she became a professor of history at New York University. Now, over her course of studying, researching and publishing, Kupperman has been rewarded and recognised many times. I'll go through the list. It's quite impressive. She was a Mellon Fellow at Harvard University in 1980-81. She was Binkley Stevenson Award from the Organisation of American Historians in 1980 for her article Apathy and Death in Early Jamestown. She is an American Philosophical Society Fellow, 1981, American Council of Learned Societies Research Fellow, 1984-85, National Humanities Centre Fellow, 1984-85, Rockefeller Foundation Fellow, 1988, and the National Endowment for the Humanities Fellow, 1989. Now, in addition, she was the Albert J. Beveridge Award, or received that from the American Historical Association in 1995 for her book Providence Island, 1630 to 1641, The Other Puritan Colony. She was also a Times Mirror Foundation Distinguished Fellow, 1995-1996. It is an impressive list of accomplishments and acknowledgements as well. Now, in addition, she has served on boards and committees of the American Historical Association, the Omohundro Institute of Early American History and Culture, the William and Mary Quarterly, the New England Seminar in American History, the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography, and the American Antiquarian Society. Now, question is, what else has she published that might work in connection with this particular book, Indians and English Facing Off in Early America? So let's have a look at what else at her bibliography. It's quite substantial. Starts back in 1980. And it starts with a book which is called Settling with Indians, The Meeting of English and Indian Cultures in America, 1580-1640. Now, that book and this one can almost be paired. Kupperman does say that she realised many years later, after her continuous research and other reading, that there were things that really needed to be not added to this first book, but it needed a complementary book, and thus Indians and English Facing Off in Early America 20 years later. But that's her first one, Settling with Indians, The Meeting of English and Indian Cultures in America, 1580-1640. She then writes America and European Consciousness, 1493 to 1750. Providence Island, we've mentioned that, 1630-1641, the other Puritan colony. Her next book then is Indians and English, the one that we're dealing with today. Indians and English Facing Off in Early America. She then writes Roanoke, the Abandoned Colony, the Jamestown Project, Our Earliest Colonial Settlements, Their Diversities in Origin and Later Characteristics, A True and Exact History of the Island of Barbados. Stay with me. Major Problems in American Colonial History, Documents and Essays, The Atlantic in World History, and that was produced by the Oxford University Press. Pocahontas and the English Boys, Caught Between Cultures in Early Virginia. And her most recent publication was essentially a series of writings by Henry Spelman. Now, Spelman, an important character in the book that we have, Indians and English Facing Off in Early America. So Kupperman takes his writings from that time and creates this book, which is called Relation of Virginia, a boy's memoir of life with the Powhatans and Potawatomis. So that's the most recent publication. Let's take a look at her background. I will tell you, there aren't going to be any videos contained in this video. I'm not going to do any PowerPoints either. It's an old-fashioned lesson, if you like. I hope you're taking notes. So, what is Kupperman's background? How might she, or how might it be relevant to our interpretation of this work? As I mentioned, born in Devils Lake, North Dakota, up near the Canadian border. It's also a town of about 7,000 at the last census, and it's a town that has a recognisable American Indian population. About 1 in 7 people living in Devils Lake are describe themselves as American Indian. Now, while white folks, if you like, dominate, the American Indians are the second largest group. It's an interesting observation from my perspective, given Kupperman's details in this particular book, in Indians and English. See if I can get it on the screen somehow. Never can manage to do that. Here we go. Yep, and I'll give up. Come back again another day. It's an interesting observation, given Kupperman's details as to skin colour, and that it wasn't seen as a discriminatory factor in those early Indian and English meetings. So perhaps it was those meetings with Indian peoples in Devils Lake, North Dakota, when she was just a young person, a child, that may have inspired her, may have stayed with her. In addition to that, Kupperman says the moving around with her father's army career showed her cultures differences. It's plural, cultures differences. The experience of living in disparate parts of the United States during World War II, and again in her teenage years, can't be underestimated, I don't think. When she was 12, her father's National Guard regiment was called up and sent to the southeast corner of Alabama, a place that she recalls, and this is in inverted commas, these are her words, that was about as different culturally from North Dakota as possible within the United States, end quote. So, our book. See if you can hold it up. Grant, you've done that. Yeah, well done. Our book. It's published by the Cornell University Press, copyrighted and first published in 2000. The Cornell University Press is part of Cornell University. They first started publishing in 1869, but they did take a break and didn't publish then. Well, they didn't publish between 1884 and 1930. Don't know. Haven't been able to find out the reasons for that. CUP, Cornell University Press, publishes in the vicinity of 150 non-fiction titles per year, regarded as one of the most important publishing houses of historical works in the United States, and it is largely dependent on book sales to finance its operations. A book, just for example, to give you some context and some continuity, if you like, a book recently on its website, you can probably find it there now, is called From Refuge to Revolution, the Caspian's Role in Shaping Modern Eurasia. Some parallels there with Atlantic history. But yeah, published by Cornell University Press. See where I can get to now, if I can manage to turn the page. So, good question. What is the book about? I'll answer by telling you what the book isn't about. Now, once again, in Karen Kupperman's own words, and this is in her introduction, it is not about the Indians and the English, but it is about individual people caught up in novel situations and trying to operate by time-worn methods. She writes that sources written by people closest to events deserve the most attention. She champions this technique and despairs and criticises the accounts written by armchair travellers, those who never travelled to the North American continent, that form a goldmine for modern authors who portray the English as overconfident imperialists pushing the Americans out. Kupperman makes the point that no writer who actually went to the Americas and experienced the Indians and their culture firsthand ever wrote in such a way. Her ambition, in her own words, is to restore the complexity, the uncertainty, and the fear to the story of the English in earliest America. So to the thesis, and what does Kupperman argue? She sets out to prove that for the last few hundred years we have misunderstood early English colonial and settler efforts on the northeast coast of the American mainland, and that the meetings between these early English and the existing American populations were far different from what has been popularly portrayed, published, promulgated, and taught. So, Kupperman's sources and her methodology. Her main evidence is in the first-hand documents of people like Thomas Harriot and Roger Williams, and they're quoted quite often in this book. She also uses reports of those who lived with and in and among the English and the Indians in the late 1500s and early 1600s. It's a massively researched undertaking, and while not an exclusive list of those early correspondents or writers of reports, not to be confused with reporters as such, there are over 600 detailed references in this book, and the references cover 50 pages. There's much meat there, so if you wanted to take a deep dive in there, plenty of meat for another inquiry. So how does she interpret all this evidence? Because it's a substantial body and it takes quite a bit to get through it. So I'll just read from the book for you for a moment. This is from page 15. We'll find our way there. So, how does she interpret it? Bear with me. Get the sticky note away. The line of interpretation presented here does not presuppose goodwill all around. And Indians and English, the book, does not seek to find and celebrate the good voices among the English writers. Suspicion, hostility, and armed clashes suffuse the record from first to last. No author wrote in a humane way as we would define humaneness. Even the most sympathetic writers easily moved into chilling denigration or worse. Some of the most intricate and sensitive accounts of native life were written by men on military expeditions. Men who could carry out the most barbaric campaigns if they felt threatened or challenged. Those who saw the Indians as hostile opponents often took the most care to try to understand them. People who remained in England and wrote it second hand could pen dismissive accounts of pathetically primitive savages. But those on the front lines in America, whose lives depended on their knowledge, knew better. This book offers an analysis of the struggle of all those involved to come to terms with the new realities. So the organisation is fairly straightforward. There's an updated preface which is written in New York, an undated I should say, not an updated preface, it's just the one preface. It's undated, her preface, but written in New York. Informs us that the book takes up issues that she was unaware of when she wrote the previous one, Settling with Indians, which we've mentioned as part of her biography, which was published 20 years previous to this one, back in 1980. So she has 15 pages of introductions, of an introduction which sets out her intention, and we've shared some of that. There's also a list of 30 illustrations, and if I'm clever enough, I'm not the most skillful of people doing this. There's a list of 30 illustrations. There's just a couple of them. Quite fantastic. Move your hands away. Yep, okay. A list of 30 illustrations, and they're illustrations from the time. They're not illustrations that she's done, but they do lend weight and context to the issues that she's addressing. 7 chapters. Chapter 1, Mirror Images. Chapter 2, Reading Indian Bodies. Chapter 3, Indian Polities. Chapter 4, The Names of God. Chapter 5, Village Life. Chapter 6, Incorporating the Other. And then Chapter 7, Resisting the Other. I do have some examples from those chapters. Let's see if we have time for them. I might give you a couple of examples. Let's try one from the first chapter, which is Mirror Images. So this is pretty early on. So Mirror Images. The confrontation between English and Indians in America has often been represented as the striding forward of a confident, burgeoning, literate culture into a world of no less confident but technologically disadvantaged societies. In reality, the English who pushed their way out onto these frontiers were deeply ambivalent members of a culture marked by fears and misgivings as much as confidence. Ambivalence pervaded the whole project of expanding into world trade and establishing colonies in America. English men and women feared the effects of such new ventures as much as they were excited by the prospects of the changes those ventures would bring. Mirror Images. The English meet the Indians meet the English, and neither party knows what to make of the other. Chapter 2, reading Indian bodies. So let's have a brief example from that. Naked. Naked was one of those words that seemed automatically to go with the word savage, and promoters without any experience of America used it freely in their writing. The armchair traveller, Samuel Purchas, even corrected James Rozier's eyewitness description of Indian women wearing beaver skins, substituting the single word naked when he reprinted Rozier's account of New England. So, plenty of examples of the importance, if you like, of how someone looks and how that represents their being, their culture, their God, etc. So, plenty of quotes by Kupperman in terms of misplaced understandings of Indian bodies, if I can put it that simply. Chapter 3, Indian polities. Bear with me. Okay. Thomas Harriot, who is quoted widely through this book and who did live on the northeast coast of the American continent, the North American continent. Although at the time he was in his mid-20s, he was the most scientifically educated English traveller to America in this early period, and his report is of the greatest significance in terms of natural history. Harriot went on to a very distinguished career as a scientist, although because he published almost nothing beyond his short treatise on Roanoke, which is another subject again, the true distinction of his work was not known, this is incredible, was not known until his papers were studied in the 20th century. So there are insights like that which Kupperman comes up with in that part in Indian Polities, which is chapter 3. Chapter 4, the names of God. And boy, we still get stuck with this, don't we, sometimes? Let's take a look at the names of God. Christianity was revealed religion. There was no access through God's own words in the Bible. So the Indian would never have been able to satisfy their spiritual longing without the coming of Europeans. Their own religious beliefs and aspirations would provide the foundation from which they could be brought to understand the great gift they were being offered. You don't have to agree with it, but the Indians' religious sensibilities, while not exactly on a parallel with the English, found a lot of commonality as the two met and discussed inevitably their gods. Village life. Okay, let's move to village life, chapter 5. How are we going for time? Getting along there. Okay, chapter 5, village life. You can always pause the video, go out and get yourself a coffee and come back. Well, the English might have drunken tea, I suspect not. Don't think it would have brought much with them. Okay, village life. Writers who remained in England sometimes portrayed the Indians as moving over the land like deer, living from hand to mouth and having a kind of herd instinct rather than any larger sense of structure. Those who transmitted their authentic American experience and drew on the lore, L-O-R-E, of the natives they talked with, on the other hand, strove to convey both the complex nature of American village life and its similarity to familiar English forms. Incorporating the Other, Chapter 6. Okay, my old friend Pocahontas. Many opinions have been offered, but no one knew or no one knows what caused Pocahontas' death. One observer, John Chamberlain, who was critical of everything that had to do with the Virginia enterprise, and who was one of the few who found the Rolfes' ridiculousness rather than impressive, ridiculous rather than impressive, sent his correspondent her picture, her being Pocahontas, saying she was no fair lady. He wrote of the Rolfes' preparation for their return to America, saying that Pocahontas, though sore against her will, and some have said she died of a broken heart, it is tempting to wonder how the bequest that they offered her to return, £100, sat on her conscience. The prospect of going among her own people, so she's coming back from England, the prospect of going among her own people as an English agent and attempting to subvert their beliefs and convert them to Christianity must have been unbearable. That's not the way that Pocahontas is normally portrayed in the modern world. So that's the other, that's incorporating the other, and then there's just the one final, chapter 7, which is resisting the other. So that's it's you and me, brother and sister. See where we can find it. See how we go. Resisting the other. While American Indians and English colonists were scrutinising each other and trying to formulate their impressions, realities on the ground were also changing. By the middle of the 17th century, all participants lived in circumstances they had only dimly foreseen. Native communities had been ravaged by imported diseases and their attendant high death rates. One result had been intensified pressure towards political consolidation under stronger chiefs, the emergence of the tribes the Europeans, in fact, had expected to find. 7 chapters, 7 stunningly good chapters with so much detail and so much what I'll call food for thought in each piece. So let's just move on to relevance to Atlantic history. How does it work? How does it speak to other things we've read? It's a pretty big question, but it goes. I think it goes far beyond that Atlantic world model that is discussed in length in our text, Atlantic History: A Critical Appraisal. I would make the comment that though read in conjunction, or at least alongside Trevor Bernard's contribution, The British Atlantic, which we'll find in Atlantic History: A Critical Appraisal, and also Amy Turner Bushnell's Indigenous America and the Limits of the Atlantic World, which is in the same book. One does get, or I did certainly had an appreciation of the deeply structured and quarried scholarship of Kupperman's work. Now, while both Bernard's and Bushnell's, I'm not being critical, are wider sweeps of British in Bernard's case and other European enterprises in the Americas, Kupperman's is very tightly focused. It's very tightly focused, putting the English and Indians under a microscope that provides the closest look we'll possibly ever get to this era. I will mention The Diligent just in passing. Not much we can pull from it because In fact, Kupperman's work is set before the Diligent sails in 1731, 2 decades later. But I think in reading the Diligent, possibly we are informed by Kupperman. If you get a chance to read Kupperman, it will inform or brief you in some ways of elements of the Diligent journey. Leave that there. To our larger discussion of Atlantic history and the strengths and weaknesses of this book. Does the book work? I think it works in spades, if you're familiar with that expression. It's brilliant. It engages, explains, offers various points of view. Karen Ordahl Kupperman's capacity to draw it all together as a cohesive explanation of the earliest times of English meeting Indians and vice versa had the effect on me of not making me, but I just wanted to pursue numerous lines of inquiry about what happened to Indian tribes and English settlements long after the initial contacts. If you're at all interested in the history of the American Indian, then Kupperman's book offers so much more than just another historical perspective. It's beyond that. If there is a weakness, I think it's Kupperman's presumption, well, I'll call it that those in England receiving reports back from the New World, from America, that those people were literate and capable of reading. Now, research would suggest that reading and writing was certainly not uncommon in upper class society in England at the time, and also in rural communities as well. But the rural and or working poor, who were often the fodder of migration, knew little except for rumour and God's hand in shaping their destiny. Thank you.